Okay, so this first section that we're doing in our imperialism unit is an important one because it provides the foundation, or that word we've used a lot, historical context for the rest of this unit, right? Why does Europe want colonies? Why imperialism? So, of course, we're going to have to talk about what imperialism indeed means. So, as we do this, follow along in your packet, fill in the blanks, highlight. That is, if you're one of my students. If you're just catching this online, you can just follow along with the slideshow. So we're going to define imperialism, and then we're going to answer the question, what are the causes of or motives of European imperialism? A motive is, why did they do something? Why imperialism is our question of today. So let's start with that first thing. What is imperialism? One nation controlling another, right? Basically, over another group of people or over another country. So we're going to talk today about how imperialism is caused by nationalism, but we kind of have already talked about the fact that an effect of imperialism is nationalism as well. We're going to see that throughout this unit. Because one nation being controlled by another, people don't like that. They want to rule themselves. So again, one nation controlling another, that's imperialism. That's what this is. They're extending control beyond their borders to other people. Okay, so how does it work? Well, one of the things I want to stress here is there's really two ways we'll look at it. One is direct rule. We are going to rule over you directly. We are going to be the government or put the government in charge, or we are going to indirectly do it. As long as you do what we want, you can have your own government. And so really two different examples, one of which we're really going to focus on, and that is that sphere of influence. It is a part of a country where the imperialist power, and you see that here, imperialist power, 4 times just on this slide. That's what sometimes we refer to as the mother country. The country that's in charge, the one that's extending their power, the one that's taking over the other places, that is the imperial power, the imperialist power. They have exclusive trading rights, and we're going to see China be carved up into spheres of influence after the Opium Wars. So, since that popped up on the screen, we're going to pretend like we're sitting right in class at the time. And if you have the notes, you're going to just jot that right down in them. I may provide a link to the page that I am referring to from my unit packet in the YouTube video. If you're catching this online, if you want to fill them out yourself and print it out, you can check and see in the description if I have done that. Maybe, maybe not. We'll see. But China after the Opium Wars, we're going to talk about later in this unit. So I'm just previewing that here now. They are carved up into spheres of influence by European powers. Divided up, carved up. We'll look at cartoons that show literally China being carved. So why imperialism? What are the causes of European imperialism? And that thing, nationalism, pride in one's nation or group, or this idea of mercantilism. You might remember mercantilism came up in Global 9 if you are in New York State. Mercantilism is an important thing. So basically, for nationalism, it's kind of this glory piece you might have done when you did the Age of Exploration. You may have talked about like the 3 Gs, God, guns, glory. That glory is the nationalism bit to a degree, right? Yes, it was individual people back then, but it's also like Europe or England is going to dominate. My country is better than your country, right? That's kind of what you should think here. England is going to have the biggest empire because we're the best. France is going to extend their control. We're going to have the best. And it also ties into this idea of mercantilism. Mercantilism is this idea that power is based on wealth. That's a term from back in Global 9. Power is based on wealth. If I have more colonies, I am richer, I am better, right? That's an oversimplification, of course, but that's roughly what we're talking about here. I'm going to show that I'm the best because I have the most places. I'm going to show I'm the best because I dominate world trade because of my colonies and what they give me which is going to be the next part of this. The Industrial Revolution, that's the historical context for imperialism, guys, right? What is the historical context for this whole unit? Well, if you went through my class, and I'm going to assume a lot of those of you following around here, if you're a student, you just talked about the Industrial Revolution probably, right? Well, let's remember with the Industrial Revolution, one of our days, our whole question was, why did the Industrial Revolution begin in Great Britain? And one of the reasons is they had natural resources or raw materials. Well, eventually, their factories are producing so much and so efficient, and the Industrial Revolution spreads to the rest of Europe that maybe doesn't have that easy access to all these natural resources. And so they need natural resources and raw materials, because otherwise, well, what's the point of having a factory that can produce a whole ton of stuff if you don't have enough natural resources or raw materials to produce that much stuff? And in fact, maybe you want to write in here natural resources also, just to know, like, kind of interchangeable here in this context. But write that in because we use the term raw material, natural resources a lot in our last unit. So again, there is that. And then you need markets to sell the goods. So it doesn't do any good to have these factories that can make all these things if I don't have enough places to sell those goods. I don't have enough people to buy them. There's not enough of a market. Remember the invisible hand, the law of supply and demand in our last unit. There's not going to be enough demand for all these products I can now make because of these factories unless I go find new markets. So in England, for example, they're going to have India as a colony, and they are going to say England needs to buy British textiles. Why? It creates a market. You might remember that from 8th grade or 7th grade social studies if you're in New York State, where the British mandated the buying of British goods. They had the Navigation Acts and things like that. That's mercantilism. That's to make sure there was a bigger market for their products. Okay, that is important. A good way to think of this, guys. Wait, there, gotta get rid of that. M&Ms. M&Ms. Markets and materials. Not those guys, but these guys. Markets and materials. M&Ms. Markets and materials. Write that in your notes here. Markets and materials. And you could add in, actually, another M. Money. M&Ms. I don't know what that would look like. Maybe I could have had 3 of the M&M people on this slide. Maybe it's 4 M's with mercantilism. It's M&M and M&Ms. I probably shouldn't have tried that. Markets and materials. And it's all about making money. Power is based on wealth, right? Those 2 M's, markets and materials, are really about this big M, money. Power based on wealth. And here is a diagram that kind of shows what these countries want. They want, it's called a favorable balance of trade. Why? Because you want this here. I'm going to try to see if I can do this. Sometimes I fail horribly at this. You want money. You want to be this prosperous country, right? The mother country, the imperialist power, sells manufactured goods to their colonies, right? They sell manufactured goods to their colonies. They want then to get the raw materials from their colonies. And you want to export, E is for exit, more than you import, I is for into. So in other words, I want to be selling more goods than I am buying because that makes me money, right? That is a favorable balance of trade. If my exports outweigh my imports, if I'm selling more than I am buying, it's going out or exiting more than coming in. I am making more money and therefore mercantilism. I don't know why I just scratched all that up, but this is mercantilism, right? Period. That's what this is. That's what this diagram shows, how it worked and what they wanted. And then we have here these feelings of religious and cultural superiority. A fancy word is ethnocentrism, which I define in a minute. I might read through this list and you might go, I mean, that just sounds like racism. Yes. And we'll talk about that. And we're going to hear as we dive deeper into what the feeling that European civilization is superior, also to this idea that Europeans themselves are superior to these groups and these nations and these peoples that they're encountering in Asia, in Africa. And we'll talk about that as we go, that, I mean, ethnocentrism sometimes can just be a fancy word for racism. They're not necessarily always interchangeable because it isn't always um, necessarily uh, between different races that you think your culture is superior to all others. We've talked about it, like the Roman Empire felt that, and they were conquering parts of Europe. So it's not a perfect interchangeable thing, but in this context with imperialism, you're going to see it kind of is a lot of times. So one of those things, so we'll see here, one of the justifications of imperialism, maybe not a cause, but a justification. Why is this okay? Because we're going to talk about some bad stuff. And one is we're going to spread Christianity. We're actually going to save these people, at least their souls. Yeah, maybe their life on earth isn't going to be enjoyable at all because of, well, we'll talk about it for the rest of this unit. But that doesn't really matter because we're saving their souls, right? You see, that was a little similar to some of the stuff we talked about during the Industrial Revolution unit. Yeah, their working conditions are bad, and it's 12 to 16-hour days, and yada, 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 but you only work 6 days because you get the Sabbath, right? Similar vibe here with these rulers that are saying we're civilizing these people, we're Christianizing these people, we're actually saving them, we're not exploiting them. And yeah, maybe we make a little money on the deal, but look at what they're getting, is kind of how this is explained during that time period by some people. Um, what this looks like is that the people in these colonies should have to reject their old ways and their old customs. They should have to adopt a Western style education system, adopt Western style governments if they're allowed to even have their own. All of these systems should be Western ways. If we are superior, we should make them like us. We are going to civilize. And this might sound familiar from 8th grade social studies if you're in New York State, where you talked about American imperialism. And there were these two arguments. There were the imperialists and the anti-imperialists. And the anti-imperialists are like, this isn't who we are. And the imperialists are like, we're going to make places, for example, the Philippines, more like us. We are going to civilize them. So similar idea, right? A term here, social Darwinism. Not at all what Darwin was talking about, right? With survival of the fittest. But there are those who lay out this idea. Why is the West dominating? Well, we just adapted to these new conditions. We now have industrialization and we have this more advanced everything, warfare, navies, all this. We just adapted quicker to the situation and you didn't. So therefore, it's only natural this would turn out this way. But we are going to try to make you more like us. We're going to make you more fit. You can see how that's kind of condescending. Even the term mother country, well, we're the parent and you're like a child. That's how this plays out here. And you see, and you maybe even saw in 8th grade when U.S. imperialism was discussed. There are cartoons that show the imperial power and the colonized people being children, right? They don't know. Again, ethnocentrism, our culture is superior and your culture is childlike, is how Europe framed this to their own people and to the people they colonized. One of we'll see things that sort of lays this out is the poem "The White Man's Burden," and we'll look at a few parts of this as we go here, and then like a sort of response to this poem that is published later um, by Rudyard Kipling of Jungle Book fame. And he basically says it is the responsibility to civilize the colonized people, make them more like Europeans. And it's a noble thing, he says. I'm paraphrasing a lot of what he says here. But they're going to complain and they're not going to appreciate you. And in fact, they're going to hate you. The hate of those ye guard is in the thing. We're protecting them, we're civilizing them, we're Christianizing them, and they're not even going to appreciate it. They're going to complain. Why are they going to complain? Well, we're going to spend a lot of the next couple of weeks talking about that. We'll talk about how Britain and some of these other countries say, hey, we did some good things. And now we're going to look at, well, even the good things you did, why'd you do it? Was it for them or was it for you? Right? So that'll be a lot of what we do in the coming days as well. So to recap, if you come out of this only having nailed down one of these things, leaving today, what I would say is it's this, right? It's this here, the M&Ms, markets and materials. That's why imperialism, markets and materials. So if you're in New York State and you take the Regents exam, sometimes they've even had a map as the source and like why did this happen, what's the historical context. They needed markets and sources of raw materials because of the Industrial Revolution. So out of today, remember the M&Ms.